This is Domenico with Easynomics, and this is going to be part 4B of a series of videos where we're doing a deep dive on evaluating the different market structures within theory of the firm. Again, as I said, this is going to be part 4B. 4A was looking at the applications of asymmetric information versus symmetric information within the market structures of perfect competition versus its polar opposite, monopoly, and also its applications to monopolistic competition. So you can find the link to this in the video notes below. Again, this is part of a series of videos. And if you scroll down, you can find these links within the video notes. This is the series here within the playlist focused on monopoly and oligopoly, but it's also part of a playlist for perfect competition, monopolistic competition. So please be sure to scroll down, open up the video notes, and you'll see links and outlines to the evaluations that we've been doing in each video. The first video in the series, part 1, we looked at the applications of allocative efficiency and productive efficiency across the different market structures as talking points within our evaluation, pros and cons. Then in part 2, we looked at the elasticity of demand across these different market structures and what does that mean for price. Is price tending to go up or down? Do firms have the incentive to reduce price to gain more revenue if it's an elastic demand curve, or do they have the incentive to raise price to increase total revenue if it's an inelastic demand curve? So again, these are talking points that demonstrate past knowledge within microeconomics that you can apply in your evaluation of theory of the firm. Part 3, again, this will be linked in the video notes below, is focusing on the benefits to society of firms sustaining supernormal profit. Yes, there's lots of negative aspects, which is what we're going to go over regarding monopolies and oligopolies, but because these firms can generate supernormal profit for longer periods of time, they can invest in economies of scale and research and development, which can spill over positively to society. So you can look for that video, again, linked below. And part 4A, as I mentioned, was looking at asymmetric information versus symmetric information, which was this video here that we were referring to. And I looked at the example of Boeing as a monopoly in the United States, a duopoly in the world market. It's has a very inelastic demand curve, doesn't face much competition. They're generating supernormal profit, and how Boeing's trying to amplify their supernormal profit by reducing costs on average. And that led to them cutting corners on safety standards in the case of the Boeing 737 MAX that led to 2 crashes and other problems that have led to death. So that could be, that is an example of asymmetric information, that the commercial airlines were not aware of these defects. Their demand with the asymmetric information was much greater than it should have been. That enabled Boeing to price relatively higher, more producer surplus for them, more output. But once it became clear that the 737 MAX had some defective issues and was unsafe, then symmetric information comes into play. Commercial airlines reduce their demand for that model, and we get a better social outcome. So that was already discussed in part 4A. Now we're going to move on in this video, focusing on the applications of, again, monopoly and how you can link it to negative production. So again, using that case of Boeing, again, we have the model of monopoly. You're drawing that model, analyzing it, demonstrating your knowledge of it. Boeing, again, seeking to reduce costs on average and their marginal costs by cutting corners on safety standards. And that led to an overallocation and an increased supply of these defective airplanes into society. So using a negative production model, we can show that S1 is the marginal private cost of Boeing producing these airlines, that lower cost curve as a result of them cutting corners in their production. We have the demand curve equal to marginal private benefit, marginal social benefit, commercial airlines demanding those aircraft. And we have a price set at PM and a quantity at QM. And at QM, we can see that the social cost of these defective airplanes are much greater than the social benefit. Society would like less of these defective airplanes out and being used by commercial airlines. So these crashes that were mentioned in the previous video is illustrating the welfare loss, the impact on lives, families. Absolutely horrible what has happened in this case. and society would like less of those types of defective airplanes. So then we have the S2 curve, where the marginal social cost is equal to marginal social benefit, higher price, lower output, and that higher price could be a result of Boeing increasing their costs of production because they're compliant with safety standards. They're going in above and beyond to ensure that these are quality aircraft that will last long periods of time for the commercial airline industry, that will not lead to loss of life. And so, again, you can have monopoly linked to negative production. So that negative production model you can draw and briefly explain and incorporate into your evaluation. What are some other real-world examples that we can use other than Boeing? So I'm going to go back to this. Let me take this out here. And here we have an outline. And this outline, again, will be in the video notes below. You can copy and paste it from the video notes and put it into a Word document if needed. And we're just going to go through these evaluative real-world example applications of graph C, monopoly. We've drawn monopoly in our exam, and we're linking it to pros and cons of these different market structures compared and contrasted with each other. So let's look at monopoly. So here we have in our first point, monopoly and oligopoly. They're market structures that can engage in the overproduction. Oops, I want to use this instead. 1 second. They can engage in the overproduction of negative externalities, which is likely the result of a lack of strong government regulation in the case of Boeing. Another real-world example of that is Saudi Aramco, which dominates global oil markets. It's the market leader within the cartel or collusive oligopoly OPEC, the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, and it contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions, which is a negative production externality. Since the monopoly does not internalize these external costs, society bears the burden in the form of climate change, health problems, and so on. So even within Saudi Arabia, and if we look at other Arab states that extract, produce, and refine crude oil, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, you'll see that the air quality in those areas are quite poor, if not very unhealthy. So that's a negative effect on the populace of those countries. So a real-world example, looking at oil and gas companies as a monopoly, oligopoly, engaging in negative production. We can use the example of Aramco from Saudi Arabia, ExxonMobil in the United States, Chevron also in the United States. They, as an example of contributing to air pollution, carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and oil spills. Monopoly in some countries, a single state-owned company controls most of the oil industry, such as Saudi Arabia, Aramco, and that lack of competition reduces incentives to adopt cleaner, greener technologies, leading to the overproduction of fossil fuels, leading to higher emissions and global climate change. So that all of that is a great example of negative production externalities as a real-world example. What are some other real-world examples that we can use? You can discuss utility providers, providers that generate electricity, energy. If electricity is produced by coal-fired power plants, I've used that example on my channel, looking at coal-fired power plants generating electricity as a negative production externality. We might find coal-fired electricity monopolies in developing countries and in developed, where they're burning coal, and it leads to smog, urban pollution, particulate matter, acid rain, and CO2 emissions again. Connected to monopoly, where a single electricity provider, so it's probably a natural monopoly, provides and dominates the industry. For example, Eskom in South Africa. Consumers have no alternative energy sources. The monopoly keeps supplying polluting energy because there's little competition or regulatory pressure by the government to innovate and improve. What are some other real-world examples that we can bring in? Mining companies. extracting land resources, mineral ore from the earth, Chile. And if we look at Chilean copper mining firms, historically have been monopolistic, and also looking at mining firms in Africa. Again, engaging in negative externality, they're reducing land quality, eroding the sustainability of their land and natural capital resources. They're engaging in deforestation. They're contaminating drinking water, water tables beneath the earth from the tailings as a result of their mining operations. Again, linked to monopoly, when one large company dominates a resource sector, a primary commodity sector, it may overexploit resources for profit while ignoring the environmental costs on local communities and wildlife. And a final real-world example that you could mention. Let's see if I can use this one. Yeah, that's a lighter color. Go ahead and use that. Car manufacturers in protected markets. China, before joining the World Trade Organization, or other domestic monopolies in developing countries, they could be producing cars, and in those factories contributing to carbon emissions. You might have high emissions and poor fuel efficiency from those cars that are being produced, from outdated technology. This was the case again in China back in the 1990s, maybe early 2000s, with the emission standards of their vehicles versus their European counterparts or American counterparts. Monopoly without competition, monopolistic producers had little incentive to innovate, to produce cleaner vehicles, because that would raise the cost of production, and higher prices would lead to reduced quantity of demand, and perhaps less total revenue and profit, leading to massive. And that had led to massive urban air pollution throughout China, as an example, in their car manufacturing back in the 90s and 2000s. So again, all of this is in the video notes below. All real world examples, all examples of connecting a monopoly model to negative production. You're demonstrating your knowledge. You're seeing how different models connect to each other and using that as talking points to discuss advantages and disadvantages of different market structures within theory of the firm. Okay, so across these 4 videos, part 1, 2, 3, 4A, and 4B, we have broken down a variety of different talking points to evaluate pros and cons of these different market structures. In the next video, number 5, 6, and 7, we're going to look at what are the solutions. To what degree can the government intervene and improve outcomes to get greater competition? Should they be subsidizing smaller firms to compete with the larger oligopolistic firms? In the case, should there be stronger regulatory pressures from the government that set certain guidelines that firms must meet in terms of health, safety standards, carbon emissions, and so forth? So we'll cover that in the next series of videos. So if you have any questions or comments, you can comment those questions below, and don't forget to subscribe and to like. Thank you so much.